Welcome to the Science and Paranormal with Dr. Yana and Dr. Elliott, where science meets the unexpected, where we delve deep into the mysteries that straddle the line between scientific inquiry and paranormal. Get ready for a mind-altering journey as we embark on this phenomenal discovery together on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM.
Dr. Yana, we're back for another episode.
We are back on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. This is Science and Paranormal Podcast. This is Dr. Yana and fabulous Dr. Elliott. We are going to be talking about the poltergeist, which is essentially the noisy spirit, and the concept of poltergeist has intrigued humanity for centuries, being a common theme in folklore, literature, and movies. Poltergeist is typically associated with paranormal phenomena characterized by seemingly inexplicable disturbances such as objects moving, doors slamming, and unexplained noises. While skeptics dismiss poltergeist activity as mere hoaxes or psychological disturbances, others believe that scientifically analyzing these experiences can shed light on their true nature. And today, we aim to explore the phenomenon of poltergeists, examining scientific evidence and theories that offer potential explanations.
Yes, and the interesting thing about poltergeists is North America kind of subscribes to, well, they don't kind of, they do subscribe to the RSPK theory, which stands for recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Whereas over in England, the parapsychologists over there use the term poltergeist very interchangeably. So when they use the term poltergeist, they could actually mean a haunting with an intelligent entity that's causing a disturbance, or they could mean that it's being caused by a living person, which is the recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis theory. So that's really interesting. Sometimes when you are listening to television programs and documentaries, you'll kind of hear that the term be used in one or two ways, and it's kind of just like a personal pet peeve for me because we're over here in North America. I'm used to it being a poltergeist case being referred to a living agent. But like I said, over in the UK and Europe, they kind of use it interchangeably.
But what do you think about it?
I've never, like I said to you before we started the show, I've never investigated a case where it turned out to be a living person that was causing it. Usually in a haunting case, for the most part, it's been determined to be some sort of discarnate entity. I do believe that there's a difference between the poltergeist cases and an intelligent haunting because of certain characteristics that come with the poltergeist. So in poltergeist cases, spontaneous fires or spontaneous water breaking out on the property or in the apartment or wherever you live is very common, and it's not very common in a haunting. The other thing that really determines it, and that's why parapsychologists over here in North America believe in the RSPK theory, is that when the living person, usually it's a female, but it can be male as well, and usually they're younger, early prepubescent or teenage years, and usually there's some sort of trauma that's happened. But when that person is removed from the area, the activity ceases. So a couple of different, characteristics that are much different than a haunting. I did find the trauma part really interesting because trauma seems to come up quite a bit in the paranormal. It seems to be prevalent in people with psychic abilities. It is certainly involved in poltergeist cases. For example, the two major poltergeist cases in Nova Scotia. The first one was the Great Amherst mystery involving Esther Cox. The trauma that happened there is she was with her boyfriend. They went on a carriage ride, and he attempted to sexually assault her and pulled a gun on her. And it was very traumatizing. And there was another carriage that was coming by while all this was happening. And it kind of interrupted that sex assault. So he got nervous and he brought her back to town, and then he kind of disappeared from town. Very shortly after that, about a week after this incident occurred, they started to experience poltergeist phenomena at her house. The other popular case in Nova Scotia is called the fire spook of Caledonia Mills. And there was a young girl named Mary Ellen McDonald. Her father was a miner, and he got killed in a mining accident and left his wife and 4 kids behind. And she didn't have the financial means. This is back in the 1900s, the early 1900s. She didn't have the financial means to support all 4 children. So she had to give up one of the children to a family friend. So also their last name was McDonald, but no relation. But McDonald's adopted Mary Ellen and brought them to her farm. And shortly after they brought her to the farm, they started to experience poltergeist phenomena. Eventually, in 1912, they had 38 fires break out in the home at one point, and they had to flee the home. They left the home for several months, and then when they returned to the home to try and live in it again, more fires started to break out, so they decided to just completely abandon the property. It eventually burned to the ground, and now there's just kind of vacant land there, but it's still kind of tradition every year that St. Francis Xavier University kids go up there and party, and they camp out there and they tell ghost stories and things like that. But again, in that case, you had a very young girl that not only had her father killed, but was then removed from her family, her siblings, and her mother. So you can imagine the trauma there, you know, and you're a psychologist that, you know, does counseling. So I know you can relate to this. So those were 2 of Nova Scotia's biggest poltergeist cases, both with underlying trauma in both of the female living agents.
That is so interesting because our psychological abilities and abilities of our bodies, energy, affecting the energy are phenomenal. And we as human beings, we think that, oh, our abilities are limited and only a certain number of people are able to perform those supposed tricks, right? But in fact, many of us are able to do that. In fact, a lot of my family members are able to do that. Some of them I had to even ask during the arguments, for example, not to wish anything upon me or anybody else, because that happens. And that's what happens subconsciously. We're not aware of the energy that we possess and what we can do with it, because some have more than the others, and we are able to affect other people and energies and events unknowingly. I know that about myself, that since I was a child, I would, every time that I would get upset at something, I would say or do something or wish upon something, and that would happen, whether good or not good. And since then, I was kind of very cautious of myself, of my own words. And I observe my relatives, perhaps it's running in the family, and I would just ask not to wish anything bad, because bad things would always happen. For example, if I would have an argument with one particular member of my family, I could feel the energy around me, and I would be stumbling and falling, and things would be breaking around me. So thinking about the poltergeist, we think it is so rare, but in fact, if you look at it closer, it's quite common. We may not call it a poltergeist necessarily as a noisy spirit's what it's called, but nevertheless, single activities can also be considered as a poltergeist. They don't have to be as noisy as they are in the movies. Remember that movie, The Poltergeist, in 1982, I believe, right?
Yes, yeah, and then they did a remake as well. No, you're right. There's uh, certain characteristics that happen in a poltergeist case that are similar to a haunting. So, for example, both haunting and poltergeist cases, a lot of people report the sound of auditory experiences like knocks, bangs, or other kind of intelligible communication. That's both common. Objects moving as well. With poltergeist cases, though, it's a little bit unique because when objects move, usually they're thrown in what people have described or witnesses have described as an unusual trajectory. So it kind of moves different instead of just going, straight across the room. It kind of floats and does like really, really strange things. Poltergeist cases also tend to have teleportation of objects or materialization and dematerialization of objects. So you'll have something disappear and then kind of reappear somewhere else. We had a case here in Nova Scotia not too long ago. It would have been maybe the fall of 2023 in East Hants, and they actually had an item disappear. So the wife was playing cards with a family friend, and the seven of spades disappeared. I'm trying to remember the card. It was seven of spades, I think, disappeared.
Had to be spades. Had to be spades.
It was the seven of spades that disappeared. We had a medium in the investigation, and it was interesting because when we gave her the deck of cards, we didn't tell her any of the details. She could feel the cards, and she's kind of coming to her, and she said that she could see the 6 and the 8 of spades. So it was the card right in between that was missing, but she could actually pick up on like the cards, the outlying cards, which was interesting. But I talked to the homeowners recently, would have been just before Christmas. They finally found that card that was missing. They had looked for it everywhere, couldn't find it. They ended up finding it in their basement underneath a blue bin, like a Rubbermaid container, in an area where the card should not have been. So it somehow disappeared from upstairs on their kitchen table and ended up in the basement underneath a bunch of stuff. And they found it when they were cleaning out their basement. So very strange things like that'll happen with objects. Again, I mentioned earlier the spontaneous fires and water breaking out. The other interesting thing about poltergeist cases is they're usually short-lived. So they usually last anywhere from a week and a half to maybe at most a year and a half, 2 years. Whereas a haunting can be for many, many years. We still hear about Anne Boleyn coming down the stairwell over in Europe and, places like that. So some, hauntings can last hundreds of years, whereas the poltergeist cases are usually very, very short-lived.
So they are associated with people predominantly. This is what I hear you saying. And if they are short-lived, then they must be associated with one particular person or just group of people, right? Or something.
Yeah, and that's usually it. So in the poltergeist cases, there's usually somebody in the household. It can be multiple people, but that's even more rare. Usually it's one person, and it's it's usually surrounding that living person. So whenever they're in the room, something's happening. There seems to be some physical injuries involved in poltergeist cases. Normally it's kind of manifested as scratch marks or objects that are being thrown around the room can hit you and hurt you. So it's more of, or people trying to avoid being hit by an object and hurt themselves. So injuries are more commonly reported in poltergeist cases. And the last kind of phenomena that is typical of a poltergeist case is writing on property or objects. You often hear about writing on walls, for example. I know in the Great Amherst mystery case, the words "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill" appeared on her bedroom wall. And there was a case over in England. Was it Michael? Yeah, no, Matthew Manning. He was a 11-year-old boy that started to have phenomena happen at his home, and then his parents shipped him off to a boarding school, and then the phenomena started to happen at the boarding school as well. And there was writing involved on bedroom walls and doors with his case, and they were signatures of deceased people that would show up, which was really fascinating. Some of them actually matched the signatures, others didn't match the signatures. So there was, some debate about whether or not it was a legitimate case or there was some fraud or trickery involved. I find interesting in poltergeist cases because a lot of times you have a legitimate case and it does have a little bit of fraud or trickery involved, but it doesn't mean that the whole case, you just toss it in the garbage. The Enfield poltergeist case, for example, is a prime example about that, where the Society for Psychical Research caught Janet faking some stuff on video, but there was some legitimate phenomena that was also happening in the house. 2 police officers witnessed a chair slide across the hallway. And they were independent witnesses that got called there to a disturbance. So just because you kind of catch somebody doing some fraud and some trickery doesn't necessarily mean that the whole case is garbage. Obviously, it presents issues. And a lot of times these young kids are getting a lot of attention from the media, from investigators and things like that. So they feel like they almost have to spruce things up, I guess, a bit for the investigators. But it's a fascinating type of investigation for sure.
Well, in the Enfield poltergeist, which apparently lasted, the activity lasted for 2 years, like you mentioned, the situation has to be pretty traumatic for people. And that was the mother, or I believe the 4 children, single mother, who was struggling to put the ends together. And for her, living in relative poverty, of course, the children were looking for some sort of attention or being able, or the ability to get out of that situation. They, of course, there were knocking sounds, the apparent possession of that girl, her oldest daughter, I believe, that the furniture was levitating and the objects moving. But at the same time, it was proven that the girl was moving those objects on her own to get the attention. However, they were policemen, like you mentioned, and the policemen also witnessed that, and there is no explanation for that.
Yeah, and no, you're exactly right. And the Enfield poltergeist case is interesting too, because there was some information that they were receiving from the deceased resident as well. So the Enfield poltergeist case could be one of those cases where it's called a mixed bag case, where you're having a little bit of activity occur from the living person, but also there's a intelligent entity as well doing stuff. Mixed bag cases are certainly more common than not, I would say, in poltergeist cases. Even the Mary Ellen McDonald fire spook case had an interesting kind of twist to it. So first off, when the night of the 38 fires broke out, the husband sent the daughter and the wife to go get help. And this is a very rural area of Nova Scotia. So your neighbor is just not next door. You have to hike quite a while. So as they're gone, 6 more fires broke out in the house with the living agent not there. So there have been some cases in poltergeist cases where there's some residual effects after the living agent has left, where activity will still happen. I find that case really interesting. Excuse me, battling a cold tonight, everybody. The American Society for Psychical Research sent Dr. Walter Franklin Prince down to investigate. And in his report, he actually erred by saying that all the fires that had happened at the house were of the girl's height, and that they all occurred while she was home. But there was actually a couple of fires up in the rafters, which were way above the girl's height. And there was the 6 fires on the night of the storm when the 38 fires broke out while she wasn't there. So he actually made an error in his report. So, but later on, when he was there, he witnessed some automatic writing from the police officer that was investigating and also a news reporter. And in the automatic writing, it talks about there being like an intelligent entity. So that was a case where you have classic poltergeist phenomena happening. You've got the spontaneous fires. You've got items that were materializing and dematerializing. Some of them were cast iron pots that would be taken from the house and then brought along the barbed wire fence towards the neighbor's property. So you'd have, those classic poltergeist cases, but then you had the automatic writing, which was kind of alluding to the fact that there was also an intelligent entity there. So sometimes you get those kind of mixed bag cases.
That's very interesting because the automatic writing is also used in psychology, although it is not called automatic writing. We suggest that people keep the journal, and in times of trouble or some traumatic events, just to sit down and jot down their thoughts. And that has a therapeutic effect. And interestingly enough, that people do get better, and sometimes very interesting things are written. So whether that is automatic writing or people are accessing their higher self or some intuitively writing something, that is uh, controversial topic. Nevertheless, something is happening there, and some information is accessed that normally would not be accessed, and that is very interesting. I would say that poltergeist is the ultimate gaslighter because we do not expect and we don't understand what is happening there. And in terms of disappearing of objects, that can be a pretty bad case of gaslighting, and we access it from the psychological the terminology. However, if we look at that, and if they are the intelligent entities that are producing this phenomena, then what is the difference between the consciousness, whether it's the consciousness that we do not see or the consciousness of us human beings? I remember living in the house in Missouri, and for many years, we would have objects appearing and disappearing, and that caused a lot of problems in our household. And also, my parents would come and visit, and I would blame them that, well, why would you take certain objects? And they would say that we didn't. And for me, nobody else could have taken that. And then my parents would blame me for that. And people who would come over just suspect other people, like, why would you do that? And then all of a sudden, when the person would come into my house, the object would miraculously appear back in the same spot. So you would just think that, why is this happening? And then you doubt yourself, you doubt those people, and you eventually break friendships, you lose acquaintances, and we finally realized that that was this spiritual, unpleasant, negative spiritual activity in the house. Although whether that can be considered as a poltergeist or not, as a poltergeist, that is a noisy spirit, there was nothing noisy about it. Although people in my household became really noisy once in a while, arguing over the lost objects that were there just a few minutes ago, right? So that can happen. And that's very interesting.
That is interesting. And another thing I think you'll find interesting about poltergeist cases, it doesn't come up as much now, but back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the term dissociation disorder used to come up quite a bit with poltergeist agents. So Dr. Walter Franklin Prince from the American Society for Psychical Research was a big proponent of this. He always threw it out there. He actually threw it out there in both Nova Scotia cases, the Great Amherst Mystery and the Caledonia Mills fire spook, where he believed that the living person in both cases might have been suffering from dissociation. which is, for those that don't know what a dissociation is, and maybe Dr. Yana can explain it a little bit better than I can, but it's basically a psychological condition where there's a disconnection between your thoughts, identity, consciousness, and memory. So the person may actually be acting out and doing something and have legitimately no memory or cognitive recall of doing it. But the only problem with that is, well, the first one that Dr. Walter Prince commented on was the Great Amherst Mystery, which he did not attend. He read a book that was written about it and then basically wrote a paper about it. So I found that to be kind of very shoddy work because he kind of armchair quarterbacked that one. And then the other one, at least he attended from New York and came down to Nova Scotia and was actually present at the house and witnessed the automatic writing. But again, in both cases, he thought that maybe the girls were suffering from dissociation disorder. What would you say, like, given your knowledge in parapsychology and poltergeists, and also, with your knowledge of dissociation disorder, like, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, this is very interesting. Very, very interesting because I worked extensively with borderline personality disorder, and that can also be considered the dissociative disorder, because many people experiencing dissociation. And what is dissociative dissociative identity disorder? What is it? Something that would used to be called multiple personality disorder, and people with borderline then can actually be exhibiting different characteristics or even different personalities. And that is very interesting, because when I got in contact with the people and started working with them with the borderline personality disorder, I noticed that they do dissociate, and a lot of the times they don't even remember what happened during those times. The times of effect, emotional effect at the time, or traumatic events that they perceived as traumatic events. So they would not remember things that happened at the time. When they were extremely upset, they would deny it later, and we may call them liars. Nevertheless, they do forget what they actually said in the state of affect. I know that during hypnosis, in the clinical hypnosis that I do with people, I've noticed that when we do regressive sessions with them, certain conditions disappear, or some interesting conditions do appear. For example, if the person had a poor vision, all of a sudden, in the altered state of consciousness, the person would be able to see perfectly. Or if something was hurting some part of the body, all of a sudden the person would be able to move perfectly and nothing would be hurting. And I've noticed that on a number of times with the clients of mine, and that was very interesting to me. So with dissociations, I must agree that people can behave completely differently from what they would normally behave. And that poses big controversy, because how would we explain it? And should we approach that from the psychological perspective, or psychiatric perhaps, or we approach it from the legal perspective, right? That the person to totally disregard the medical perspective and deem the person legally liable for all those crimes. In the case of teenagers that you mentioned, primarily the poltergeist happened with the teenagers. In the case of teenagers, not necessarily that they have they can be punished with the same at the same level as adults would be punished. The law enforcement guy here, the equivalent of the FBI American FBI. This is you were such an interesting person to me, so that is why it would be very interesting to find out uh, how do those people get charged? I know that you've seen several cases, unexplained cases. So how would people be charged? Adults predominantly. With the teenagers, with adolescents, it is not as strongly as it's not severe of the punishment as that would be for adults committing certain crimes. So in your practice, did you see anything that would be indicative of both paranormal activity and for which, in fact, people were charged in court?
That's very interesting. I'll get to that in a second. We have a question here from Bo Chason, and I would say it's more for you, Dr. Yana. But have you ever done any hypnosis in a correctional facility or prison or on inmates that have requested it?
No, I have not done. This is very interesting, and I wonder why the person would be even asking. Bo, what is the reason behind that question? I don't believe that inmates can actually request a hypnotic session. I think that that would not be possible because that's something elective and not necessarily that would have access to it. And I wouldn't go necessarily to prisons to perform uh, hypnosis on any of the inmates. However, in my practice, I have seen people accessing their memories of in the previous lives that they did murder some people before, but not really in the life that they have now. Not any memories that they currently have. So Bo says that it is not something that has been done in Nova Scotia. So
Bo
I don't
used to
know those
be
cases.
Bo used to be in charge of one of the jails here in Nova Scotia as a correctional officer. So that's interesting. Going back to the not criminally responsible defense, we did actually have a case. I was working on homicide up in Yellowknife, and a gentleman had murdered his mother and left the house and was found walking down the road completely naked. And when somebody phoned it in, the police attended. He basically said, I just killed my mother, and he was covered in blood and whatnot. So right off the bat, you were thinking this is a very strange case. You're already as a police officer thinking like this could be being set up for the not criminally responsible defense. And basically what happens is we still treat the investigation like a homicide. We go to get a search warrants and go to the crime scene and seize all the evidence and send all the evidence off to the laboratory. You still interview the individual. Now, during the interview, usually you can pick up as well if there's some kind of mental health issues going on. But ultimately, it's up to the prosecutors to request a psychiatric forensic, basically, examination of the accused. And in this case, the accused was he did undergo forensic evaluation. He was found not criminally responsible. So what happens in Canada, I'm not sure about the US. I assume it's pretty similar. But in Canada, you don't go to a correctional institute. You go to a secure mental health facility for an indeterminate amount of time until they can determine whether or not, that they can correct whatever's wrong, get you medicated, and eventually get you released back to society. Some of them never get released, and they stay in there until they die. Others have been released. I know we had a crazy case out in Manitoba. I wasn't involved in it, but it was big news up here in Canada, where a gentleman riding a Greyhound bus, and he just all of a sudden took a knife out and cut somebody's head off on the bus. And everyone like fleed off the bus, and everyone was traumatized by that case. And he ended up going to jail. Sorry, not going to jail, going to the mental institution, being, treated for several years. He was also found not criminally responsible. And the last I heard, he was out and released to the public now.
Well, that's very interesting, being released to the public, whether the person would do that again, whether he would also again be in affective state to uh, do that again, to kill somebody again with a knife just all of a sudden. So we never know. And that is very interesting that people like that would be actually released back to the public. And it is getting to be a dangerous place on earth to live.
Yeah, it's very scary. The guy's name was Vince Lee. For anyone that's interested, I'll type it in the chat there. I'll just type in interesting homicide case for anyone that wants to check that out. But his name was Vince Lee, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. He was found not criminally responsible due to mental illness. Went to a high security mental health facility, and like I said, the last article I saw about him, I believe he got released. It was either fully released or on at least a day pass, but I know he did get out. So
not even in a medical facility. So he did not spend time in a psychiatric clinic.
Well, he did in a high security mental health facility.
Okay.
Yeah, he spent some time there for sure. Yeah. I don't recall what his diagnosis turned out to be, but very very crazy case. But it does happen, like you said. Pops up every once in a while.
Yes, and we never know what is happening in human psyches. Working with people over the years, I have noticed that as much as we know about human psyche, we don't know nearly enough to be able to diagnose or even to explain certain conditions. Why would people be able to perform certain activities under hypnosis when they we would say alters, right? Or their alternate personalities would be explored, not necessarily with dissociative personality disorder, but just with the regular people. Why would they be able to be completely healthy under hypnosis and come back to their normal state when they wake up? Meaning that there would be a sick people again. So to me, it always puzzled me. And I even tried one time to leave the healthy person and just give the person a suggestion that the healthy person prevails. So when he wakes up, he's going to be healthy. But the interesting thing happened is that he had a different personality. So that was still him. He was able to remember his name and everything that was happening in his life, but his personality was different. And I noticed that, and I put him down and returned him back, because you never know what you can bring out. And that is a very tricky field. You have to really be watching people under hypnosis. I wouldn't suggest to anyone who wants to try hypnosis to just go to anybody who just had 2 days of training in hypnotherapy or in hypnosis. You can't really have 2-day training or a weekend or even a week of training in hypnotherapy. Therapy is therapy. But nevertheless, do not even attempt hypnosis with people who just had a minimal training in it, who don't know essentially what they're doing. That can be pretty dangerous.
Absolutely. And like you said, and like this episode really is talking about the power of the mind, and just how much we don't even really know about our minds. Or just it's psychologists are always learning, and scientists are always learning more and more about it. So like when you are digging into someone's subconscious through hypnosis, I find that absolutely fascinating. I find the fact that somebody, so the theory behind RSPK, or recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, is the fact that it's the body's of letting out an extreme amount of stress or emotional energy into the physical environment. And you see the power of the mind, like in different things. Like there's healing, there's the touch healing that people go to, like Reiki and things like that, energy healing. And then I also find it interesting too, and it happened to my dad, when someone's told that they're sick, you kind of, sometimes you see a bad decline in their health, whereas before they found out their diagnosis, they actually like appeared to be okay. And I believe they call it the nocebo effect, which is the opposite of the placebo effect. So in studies, a placebo, you don't know if you're getting the medicine or not, but some people will report that they feel good, and it turns out that they were just taking a sugar pill, but it's that placebo effect. Well, the nocebo effect is kind of the opposite of that. So once somebody's told that they're sick, all of a sudden, between that and some of the psychosomatic responses of the body that can be exacerbated by their mental health, the stress and the anxiety of being told that they're sick, they'll actually start to get sick. Have you seen any of that in your work?
I have, because a lot of the times that I would suggest to an ill person that he is absolutely fine, he or she is absolutely fine, and they would believe me because they come to an authority figure believing that I'm able to heal them in one way or another. And when I give them the suggestion, whether that is through medical hypnosis or just a regular suggestion, there is such a thing as a conversational hypnosis as well. And of course, a lot of manipulative people, they use it for negative purposes, but if it is done therapeutically, people do get better. They do believe that they have gotten rid of certain ailments, and they get up and say, "Oh, I'm absolutely fine," and they leave happy, and somehow their depression and anxieties are alleviated, and they don't even come back because they feel good. And if you can do that, just simply just planting that seed, that idea in somebody's mind, what can we do in a negative sense, for example? And when we go to the doctors and they say how many things are wrong with us, we may believe that. We may believe that absolutely. And it is important to listen to ourselves, because I always warn people from going to different kinds of fortune tellers or dishonest healers who would actually plant the idea in their minds that they do have problems with their health, or they will get sick in some time, or they do palm reading or something like that. Or they would be told that in the future, in 5 years, they're going to die. They will die. They will die in 5 years, because that's the expectations of them to die. I remember that I was a first year of college, and there was a girl. We were 17. We were 17, and she comes to the lecture, and she is late, and like, "Where have you been?" And she said, "Oh, I was outside. I was just on the way to the lecture, and a gypsy stopped me, and she decided to look at my palm, and she told me that I'm going to die in a year." And I'm like, this is a huge nonsense, bloody nonsense. Forget about it and take it out of your head. Turned out
Yeah,
to
and
be, she kept thinking about it. She kept thinking about it for the whole year. And guess what? She died a year later, and she drowned in the sea. So imagine that she didn't know that. So there is a possibility to change somebody's destiny by just having a suggestion, planting a
yeah, and
suggestion.
that's actually a sign of a bad medium or a bad psychic. You're not. I'm told that there's no real like governing body for psychics or mediums, but a lot of them do have their own personal ethics. And I've been told by a lot of mediums that they won't tell you stuff like that if they do have some sort of inkling, that you're sick, or that you're going to die, within the next short while, that they don't tell you that. That's a sign of a good medium, and probably just for the reasons that you just described. I think it was an episode of X-Files, or it was some drama show, and basically that's what happened. The medium told the person they were going to die, and they walked outside, and then they got hit by a bus, something like that. So it's the mind is a very powerful thing. I think it's more powerful than what we actually realize.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That is why I control my mind. I teach my children and people around me and people who come to see me. I always tell them to control your mind. We see so much from the media. Oh, the power of the mind. You talk to yourself, persuade yourself things are going to be better, and the positive psychology as well. Just believe, right? But we think about it and we dismiss that. And how easy is it to convince yourself? It is. I was just driving this morning in my car to my appointment, and I was thinking, how easy is it, for example, that I drive and it takes 10 minutes to drive from one place to another for me. And during that 10-minute drive, I talk to myself. And I've noticed that when I talk to myself, things do change. And then I realized, I don't talk to myself audibly. I did not say anything. That every time I drive and I talk to myself, saying that, oh, my day is going to be great, and my all of my ideas and projects that are going to come through with success, the interesting thing happens that what I say, it happens exactly in the same day. I get certain type of people that I say that are going to come into my life, or people are going to completely open their arms and do everything that I ask them to, because there are certain projects that I have to ask for donations for certain projects. And a lot of the people, nobody is willing to part with their money so easily, right? We're human beings, and you have to be able to persuade them. And sometimes I don't even have to open my mouth. And when I have decided that this is going to happen, people do that. And it just blew my mind this morning that I had discovered that I don't even speak it audibly. And imagine if we speak to ourselves in our thoughts, if that is possible to change our day, what if it is possible to change our destinies in the same way? Like that girl she believed that the gypsy, that she's going to die in 1 year. And in fact, that she did. Now, why would tell somebody that you are going to die in a year? You can't change that anyway. But you already planted that seed in the mind, and the person expecting that to happen. So why not put it into the good cause and for your own benefit? And we can control our mind. We can absolutely control our mind. And the longer I live, the longer I'm persuaded, that the more that I'm convinced that it is absolutely possible. And I start to use my brain and the energy that I have in the certain way that will be beneficial for myself and also for people around me. Because if you use that energy, which is absolutely possible, anybody possesses that energy. I am not a special person here. It's just we must be able to channel that energy onto some positive outcome. So those children, for example, the adolescents that you're talking about in the poltergeist events, they were able to channel it in a certain way. Why? Because of some traumatic events, because they really wanted something. And imagine that really happened. And they were able to cause all of that activity around them. So it is very interesting.
It is. And guess what? We're at the top of the hour. You're listening to Science and Paranormal. We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans and Roku TV. I also noticed we have a lot of listeners out there, but I don't think they watch the video. So I should throw it out there this episode that if you do have any questions for Dr. Yana or myself, you can email us at scienceandtheparanormal@ppri.net. So it's scienceandtheparanormal@ppri.net, which stands for Paranormal Phenomena Research Investigation.net. You can also visit our website at www.scienceandparanormalpodcast.com. And we'd also like to let you guys know that if you are enjoying the show and you want to support us, to give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, share, comment. We do have, people that comment through YouTube and Facebook through the show. We do read them and try and respond to them when we can. But I just thought I'd throw those out there for those that don't watch the video and don't see the text scrolling by. And the other announcement I'd like to make as well is if anyone out there is interested in coming to check out Nova Scotia in October, I'm organizing the 2024 Halifax Paranormal Symposium, which is the second annual symposium. Last year, I took a big risk. My nonprofit organization, Paranormal Phenomena Research Investigation, decided to host this. We went out and tried to seek some sponsors. One of them was actually Michelle DeRoche from the Outer Realm last year. She's sponsoring again this year. Dr. Yana's made an individual contribution to the symposium as well. It's going to be held at the Halifax Tower Hotel and Conference Center on Saturday, October 12th, 2024. And you can get all the details about it at ppri.net/tickets. And
I am glad you're doing that in October and not in winter, in January, February in Nova Scotia.
No, it's actually still nice in the fall, actually. It's not too cold. The leaves are turning. It's a very beautiful time. See you later, Bo. See, Bo's got to head out. No, it's great. And last year we brought in international guest speakers. We talked about demonology. Dr. Richard Gallagher, he's a psychiatrist from Columbia University. We brought in, Lauren Coleman was supposed to come, but he had to appear by Zoom. There was a hurricane coming that weekend, and his ferry got canceled, and there was a whole bunch of complications, but he did appear by Zoom. Then we had my colleague, Dr. Darrell Walsh, that we've had on the show before. He spoke. We had Chris Stiles, who is a ufologist here in Nova Scotia. He will be on the show with us next week talking about UFOs. And we had Kim Moser, who is a producer and host on Eastlink's Haunted television show. And then this year I'm gonna be speaking. A lot of people said that they wanted to learn a little bit more about PPRI, and I'm going to do a presentation, I think, on law enforcement and the paranormal. And we've also got John Kruth coming from the Rhine Research Center. So I'm very excited to meet John in person. I've taken lots of courses from him and communicated with him, over email and Facebook. We also have Chris Kowski coming to talk about alien abductions. He's a ufologist up here in Canada. And we also have Holly Stevens, who worked with Kim on the TV show Haunted, and she's going to discuss some of the different paranormal equipment that's used and the difference between using it scientifically and using it on television. So I think it'll be a good lineup for 2024. We're hoping, to keep going and have it every year. And it'd be great. Who knows? Maybe we'll both get to speak at a conference together. You got to give us those likes and shares, and
likes and shares Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you would like to support us and donate to our company, to our radio show, you can do that on our website, www.b, that's a different podcast, Science and Paranormal Podcast.com. And you can click the button donate. Any amount counts, and we would be grateful to you for that, because we are talking here about this phenomena here, and actually for free, and we are not being paid for it. So we would like you to support us if you enjoy this show. So thank you for doing that. Now, we should probably talk about some other explanations for the poltergeist phenomena. What about then electromagnetic field theory, Dr. Elliott? Researchers have speculated that erratic electromagnetic fields may be responsible for poltergeist activity, and high levels of EMF can cause hallucinations, anxiety, or even physical discomfort, which may lead people to believe they are experiencing a supernatural presence. Science have found Studies actually have found correlations between reported poltergeist activity and higher than normal EMF levels in particular locations. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Elliott?
Yeah, that's true. It's there's no clear-cut answer with the paranormal. You're always chasing one theory after another, but you're right. Research does suggest that RSPK incidents tend to occur under unusual emotional stress on days where there's above average geomagnetic fields being produced by the Earth. There was a study done in 2012 by Miller, I believe, that talks about that. And we know from the laboratory experiments, especially the work of the late Canadian, Dr. Michael Persinger in Laurentian University, that when he applied increased magnetism to the temporal lobes of the brain, people would start to experience haunting characteristics. They would see apparitions. They would feel like they're being watched. Some people even reported seeing religious figures like the Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ. So, certainly do subscribe to that. That is, that's definitely one theory. Another theory of poltergeist is kind of similar to the RSPK theory, but they call it the pseudo possession theory. And this was kind of coined by Gould and Cornell in 1979. They were two leading experts in poltergeists. They wrote a great book. I think it's actually just called Poltergeist. Really good book. So they kind of describe it as when the living agent is kind of left with some trauma, they start to have some guilt and they become very conflicted. And it's an unconscious psychological process that we don't fully understand yet, but the victim starts to kind of believe that they're a target for like a diabolical attack. And they start to have obsessive and intrusive thoughts. Then they'll have this inner conflict inside them, which then becomes the outer manifestations in the physical environment. And I've actually seen not poltergeist activity happen, but I've seen that kind of same process happen with sexual assault victims. When I was on the integrated sexual assault investigative team with the RCMP, you would often hear victims say that they or survivors say that they feel guilty or they're conflicted, especially if they knew the individual. So you can kind of see how that kind of builds upon what's going to happen with the poltergeist activity. Although, like I was telling you before the show started, I find it absolutely fascinating and wonder what kind of stress someone has to go under for it to start to affect the physical environment. Because as a police officer, you certainly face a lot of stressful situations. I can think of a couple that I was. There was one domestic disturbance that we got called to late at night in the middle of nowhere. I was working by myself in Chester. nearest backup about 20 minutes away, and there was a guy on the loose in the woods with a knife, and I couldn't see. Like, he had the advantage because he was hiding in the woods and could see, and I'm showing up, in the police car, and I don't know where he's at. So he's already got, the advantage. Very scary, very stressful situation. Another situation was a bar fight outside of a nightclub in Penticton. It took 6 police officers to arrest the guy. My partner almost got disarmed. There was 200 angry, drunk bar patrons outside. They were grabbing our tool. She lost like a police radio. Somebody stole it right off my partner's belt. Again, very high stress situation. And at no time did like the police radio levitate or did an item disappear and reappear, materialize. So it almost, becomes very hard to believe unless you see it, I guess. And the paranormal is kind of becoming like that today. I find all these videos on TikTok. Like, I always get sent videos from friends of kind of haunting and ghost things happen that are caught on video on TikTok. But it's just so easy to fake things today with the technology and AI. And again, those are 2 situations that I've been in that were highly stressful and nothing paranormal happened. So, I think it's just, again, like even Gald and Cornell said, it's just some sort of unconscious psychological process that we don't fully understand yet. And I'm sure you've come across people that have that really guilty feeling or conflicted feeling inside them. And that's probably, why they're coming to you to kind of discuss that and work through it.
Well, isn't that always is the case? Otherwise, why would we be coming for help to anybody? That is always is the case because we are conflicted and we can't resolve our own personal conflict. That's why we go for help. Interestingly enough, that conflict is actually causing a lot of this activity, and the studies have even shown in the clinical labs prototypical spontaneous sense presence of a sentinel being and concomitant electroencephalographic activity. This is a very interesting activity in the brain that affects us, and we are able to perceive our reality differently, and we sense the presence. Although many of us, we do sense the presence. Even of the person that is standing behind us, we don't have to go far. As human beings, we are able to sense people next to us or when somebody stares at us, right? But also the scientific studies, they went further and actually also investigated the transcerebral magnetic fields, weak transcerebral magnetic fields, and how they affect the human consciousness and brain. A lot of the times there was this parasitic consciousness present that people have reported. So that is very interesting, how we perceive our reality. Nevertheless, when we look at the poltergeist cases, what happens is that the poltergeist is in fact can be an objective reality, not necessarily just subjective reality of the perceived phenomena, right? Many people are able to observe similar things that are happening. So how do we explain that? That is the question. To believe or not to believe. It is also important to note that scientific evidence regarding poltergeists is limited, partial, and inconclusive. And the nature of poltergeist experiences makes them inherently difficult to replicate under control conditions. So, additionally, the subjectivity of human perception further complicates the study of poltergeist activity. How do we objectify our experiences? For example, if we look at the Poltergeist movie that we probably all seen as children, and which actually damaged me psychologically watching that movie as a child. With that was so bad. In fact, if we look at that, of what actually happened with the actors after that, that would be an objective reality by itself. So the movie was done in 1982, and the protagonist of the main character, Carol Ann, Heather O'Rourke, she was 12, and she actually died at the age of 12, just all of a sudden by the bowel obstruction, by the abscess. So how would you explain that? And not only that, so many different people, the cast, also something happened to them and they died. Her sister played, believed that by Dominique Dunn, right? She died in 1983. And then also the Julian Beck, who played her intimidating spirit, also died of stomach cancer in 1985. So shortly after the movie was released, the first one, so many people died. This is very interesting. And also the friendly ghost that played by Will Sampson died in 1987 at the age of 53. How would you explain all of those deaths?
Well, movies that deal with the supernatural have often reported, strange things happening. I know Ryan Reynolds, he played the main character there in one of the. I know they made the Amityville horror movie over and over again, but he played the main character in that, and he said strange things would happen to the staff. They'd wake up, strange hours in the night, and he said basically he has no interest in doing horror movies
again.
Yeah. I know even Jennifer Carpenter that played Emily Rose in the exorcism of Emily Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Staff were waking up at 3 a.m., which is considered the demonic noon hour. Because it's believed to be the opposite time that Christ died. They believe Christ died at 3 p.m. So the demonic love 3 a.m., which is kind of the opposite time. So again, is it the power of the mind? Because those types of people that are involved in those movies usually get quite deep into their character.
Yeah, but if we look at that, at 3 o'clock, it's not necessarily a bad hour in other cultures. That could also signify early morning, and the hours of the gods. I would wake up early once in a while, 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock. Consider 3 is not too far from the 4 o'clock. And with the time changes in our societies, how do we explain that? In my understanding, that it could be also the a phenomena that we can be easily persuaded by our own selves and by the events that are happening around us. So if there was, for example, an Indian actor playing there, right, he would not have been awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning. Or would he be? Because he does not, Jesus and Christianity is not his belief, right? So how do we explain that? That is very interesting.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of demonology is heavily, or the demonology, I should say, that we're familiar with, is heavily based on Roman Catholicism. So the stuff you're seeing in the movies and TV shows and things like that. I mean, I woke up this morning at 3:18. I think we've got one of those bedroom clocks that project the time up on the ceiling. So if you do wake up, you can kind of take a look and see what time it is. And I think I woke up at 3:18, but at no time did I think I was being tugged at by a demonic entity or anything like that. But
it was just the time that I was thinking about our podcast and preparing for that and thinking about you, and you just woke up at the same time.
I probably was, because whenever we have a show, to try and do some preparation, and then of course I try and do what I can for PPRI during the day as well. So I probably did. There's sometimes I wake up I used to have, because of policing, and the constant change in your physiological body. So, we'd work night shift, and it would be quiet, and law enforcement word. So anyone out there that's listening, that's law enforcement.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you never say the Q word when you're working, because you're going to get
Yeah.
hammered with calls. But it would be quiet, and then all of a sudden a serious call would come in, and you're going from almost being asleep at 3 a.m, like your body's tired, and your physiological body is saying, hey, stupid, you should be in bed right now sleeping. What are you doing still awake? And then all of a sudden your adrenaline and your cortisol kick in, and all that. So I was having trouble towards the end of my career sleeping. Like, I would wake up at like crazy hours, like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and I felt like I could run a marathon. Like, I woke up and I was just like so full of energy, and I'm like, I barely slept. I need to sleep. And then, of course, about 10 minutes before your alarm's going to go off, that's when your body wants to sleep. But guess what? Now it's time to get up and go to work. So I ended up having to go on some sleeping pills, but I didn't like the way that they would make me feel the next day. I'd wake up and kind of feel like you're hungover, and like cognitively I was like slower and just like couldn't get going. And so I kind of sorted that out now. But I noticed, like, if I'm worried about something, or I know that like we have a show coming up, and I'm kind of like, oh, I haven't done my research yet or whatnot, then
Yeah.
I may wake up periodically through the night, kind of thing. So but again, it all goes back to our mind.
It goes back to our minds. Yeah, we have a comment here that high spiritual movement between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. And that is absolutely true. What happens is that you also mentioned the witching hour. But what happened? Who are the witches, if I call it the witching hour, right? So I don't believe, and I don't remember witches actually existing before Christianity. Those were the knowing mothers. Those were the knowing women that were able, or like the first doctors, I believe, that were treating people and children, men and women, of different ailments. So if we
Yes.
look at that, what is the essence here? Yeah, the witching hour, the high spiritual movement between 3 and 5 a.m. That is absolutely the truth. So if we pathologize it and say that this is a demonic hour, perhaps that it would be that I have been awakened so many times at 3 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. I do not necessarily see or believe that I'm being awakened by some demonic activity, although I would always ask. And a lot of the times that this is something that you have to be awake in order, for me particularly, to write things down, that a lot of things that would be transcending, and a lot of information would flow that would be absolutely important for myself personally, and also for clients of mine. So that is the time of great insight, I've noticed. So thank you for this nice comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and as Peter Venkman says in Ghostbusters, call it fate, call it luck, call it karma. I do believe that everything happens for a reason, I believe he says. But no, I do believe that I do believe in like the type of energy that you put out as well. So like you said, if you're surrounding yourself with positivity, and you're having positive self-talk and things like that, I find that your day does run smoother, and you attract positivity. Whereas if you're always negative, and you're hanging around with the wrong crowd, and you're just living in that negative space, then you're attracting that negative energy. I really do. I really do believe in that.
Absolutely, that is the case, and that we operate on different frequencies. Believe it or not, we do. We all have different frequencies, and that's why how we are attracting what we're attracting into our lives. As soon as we change our mind and we get onto different frequency, and that by itself is attracting other type of people to us. However, another explanation could be for this kinds of experiences, and also the poltergeist activity could be also the infrasound. So speaking of those frequencies, the higher frequencies that we should be operating on in the love and happiness, there is such a thing as a infrasound, and infrasound refers to sound frequencies below the lower limit of human perception. It has been suggested that exposure to infrasound, often generated by natural phenomena such as earthquakes or storms, can induce a range of psychological and physiological effects. And these effects may include feeling of unease, anxiety, hallucinations, potentially contributing to the perception of poltergeist activity. So the infrasounds that I'm talking about, those are the sounds that we cannot hear. Nevertheless, a lot of us, we're pretty sensitive, and I know that with myself, I'm very sensitive. I can smell. Some people call me like, you have a nose as like dog's nose. I have ears that I can hear so many things that imperceivable to other people that they cannot hear. I can see. So I would say that I do hear sometimes those frequencies that are not heard by the regular ears, and that is not a good thing also, because that can affect me negatively. And I notice that a lot of the times that it does cause the symptoms of depression. It does cause some hallucinations, and I have been able to pinpoint that because as a scientist, you look for the ways to explain it through the scientific methods, or just like regular things that are happening around you. And there could be so many different explanations.
Yeah, infrasound is big now in parapsychological investigations. There's been studies done, like you said, that show typically sounds that are below 20 hertz, which is kind of our normal limits of human hearing, can cause us to experience both physiological responses and psychological responses. It can cause kind of like that feeling like you're being watched. In haunted homes, you always hear people say, I feel like I'm always being watched. It can kind of create fear, discomfort. Some people have reported feeling dizzy or nauseated. I know there was one case where they were investigating a house, and it turned out that there was some infrasound coming from the building next door. And when they had all the special equipment to detect it, it was when the elevator was operating next door, it was causing infrasound sound waves to come over to the house that was allegedly haunted. So it's certainly being looked at in paranormal research and investigations these days. And that could certainly, some of the lower level poltergeist activity, kind of account for that. Certainly, we haven't seen infrasound cause levitations or spontaneous fires or anything like that, but there are things that can cause that. For example, Lloyd Auerbach, a parapsychologist out in California, talks about this crazy house that was built by this architect. So he didn't, from the sounds of it, he didn't really like follow the kind of standards, the building standards. And this couple kind of moved in, rented the house, and they started to experience all this strange phenomena, which they attributed to being paranormal. They would see glowing balls of light, and they'd have spontaneous fires erupting on the walls. There was one room where they would feel really sick and nauseated in. It was freezing cold. Lloyd and one of his assistants went out and investigated the house and found a whole bunch of issues with the house. First, it was built on an old dump, and there was methane gas coming up through the ground, and it was a very like dry and staticky place out. He's out your way, actually, Yana, out in California. So what was happening is when the static electricity was hitting the pockets of methane gas. That's what was causing the wall to catch fire and the furniture to catch fire. And the room where they would feel sick and it was freezing in had an underground water source that was underneath it. And it was also not a level room because the architect, like I said, he was just kind of winging it, I guess, or trying out something different that wasn't a code.
So winging it.
what they ended up doing is getting out of their lease out of that house. But that was kind of like almost like a designed haunted house because there were so many different issues with it that, to that couple that reached out to them, they thought that the house was haunted, that there was something going on. But once you started digging into it, and doing some assessments, like Lloyd and his assistant did, then they found out some natural causes for it. Now, that's not to say that all hauntings can be naturally explained. I think it's a mix, and I think it's the same with poltergeist cases. I think that some cases can be explained through science, and others you're kind of left still don't know how it happened. And I always use some of the examples, the cases that we had. We had a lady send. I was doing a public lecture out at the Fortress of Lewisburg, helping some friends out from Haunts from the Cape, and I had a lady approach me, and she told me that she had a ghost photo. So I was thinking skeptically that it was going to be one of those pictures of orbs or dust, or basically a trick of the camera lens. And so she showed it to me, and I was actually kind of impressed. You could clearly tell it was like a face, and it was on like near the screen door. And so upon initial inspection on her phone, like it looked really, really interesting. So I said, do you mind sending that original photo to me and I'll have it, checked out? So we did. I've got a commercial photographer on PPRI, so I always use his professional skills. So what we were able to determine is that it looked like the face was just on the screen, because when you zoomed in and kind of enhanced the photograph, you could actually see the squares, like each tiny square on the screen. And behind that, you couldn't see that white ghostly face. So we noticed in the reflection of one of the pictures that the homeowner had a pool in the background. And both Mike and my wife, Sarah, both came up with a theory. They're like, I wonder if somebody had pressed their face against the screen. You know how kids are when they want to drink or they're hungry, they get out of the pool, they run up. Instead of them opening the door and coming in the house wet, they probably like leaned into the screen and yelled something. So we did an experiment where I had Sarah push her face against the screen, just like the photograph showed, and it had a little bit of it, but not quite. And I said, well, how long ago did you apply your makeup? And she said, oh, like in the morning. And this was like late afternoon. I said, go put like a little bit of, fresh makeup on. Let's try it again. And sure enough, when she did, it came back. It matched the picture identical. And then, so I contacted the owner and I said, can you go out and take like a couple more pictures right now? Because it had kind of washed away and faded, she didn't notice it. But when she took the picture with the flash, you could just barely see the face still there. And so we did up a report for her and explained all that. And she was very happy. Like you could tell it wasn't a case of fraud or she was trying to play a trick on us. She was actually legitimately happy that we were able to explain this and that she didn't have like this demon looking face in her kitchen. So that's a case, where you really dug into it, used a professional photographer, used a bit of like technology and science to kind of solve it. But then there was a house I investigated once before in Kentville, Nova Scotia, many, many years ago, would have been late 90s, where the homeowners had pennies materializing out of nowhere. And we actually had that happen to us, where a penny, we had swept the area before we started and took all the, the protocols, made sure everything was clean. And we had set up a camera in between the kitchen and the dining room. And there was no way that anyone could get by us without us seeing it. because we sat on the couch with the wife all night, and her husband and the 2 kids were upstairs in bed by this time. We're talking like 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And every hour on the hour, I would get one of my investigators to go and check the camera, make sure it's still recording, make sure the batteries are still good, because you know how it is in these paranormal investigations. Those batteries seem to rapidly drain. And sure enough, around 2 or 3 in the morning, when he went to go check everything for me, a penny had materialized by the base of the tripod. So we didn't get it on film because it was outside the scope of the camera. But you could hear everything. Like, you could hear me ask him to go check it. You could hear the springs release from the couch when he stood up. You could hear him walk over. And at no point, like, you didn't hear like a penny hit the floor or him bend down. You'd hear that scuffling kind of noise. That was just something that happened, and it was unexplained.
Now, what were those paintings? What year were those paintings?
They were a mix. I still have them in my file cabinet over there in the case file. But they were a mix. None of them were from like the future or anything like that. It would have been from like the mid 90s down. There was actually one American coin in there, actually, because you guys have, I think it's Abraham Lincoln's memorial on your penny. So there was actually an American penny in there.
That's interesting. How come there were no Russian pennies or anything like that, like copies? That's very interesting.
Yeah,
we didn't. Elliott, you working small. Why didn't you ask for more money? Like, send us more and not paper. Just do
that's
the
what I told
transfer.
the homeowner. I said, it's too bad you didn't have $20 bills showing up around here, because they literally had like a jar, like a pickle jar, loaded with pennies. And she said, these are just the pennies we keep finding around the house.
Interesting.
And I said that to her. I said, yeah, it's too bad that they're not $20 bills.
But then they would lose their value with time.
Yeah. I think it would be pretty cool though to have $20 bills just showing up everywhere.
Actually, for me, it would be like probably hundreds. That would be much better than just $20 bills. I would be happy to find them here and there and everywhere.
Hundreds would be way better. I could guarantee that we'll have the symposium every year if hundreds were just materializing.
But, and you know what would be even better? The wire
there was
another Elliott.
Yeah. No, there was another poltergeist case. It's kind of less known here in Nova Scotia, but there was another one again around that kind of time period, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was in Windsor, Nova Scotia. And they had coins materializing, but they were strange coins, like from Europe, and like Spanish gold coins and things like that.
Oh, now we're talking.
Yeah, and like very
here in more details.
Yeah, like very strange coins that somebody wouldn't have easy access to. You know what I mean? Like pennies. Well, we don't have pennies in Canada anymore. We got rid of them. I guess they're worth more than 1 cent, so we stopped producing pennies. So the only time I see them is when I go down and visit down in the States. But yeah, like, so those are easily accessible, kind of coins. But the ones that were materializing in Windsor in the poltergeist case, they were like foreign coins, very old, very strange coins. So very, very fascinating.
That would be interesting to trace their origin. It would be very interesting, because if they materialized here, they had to dematerialize there at that time. So if we look at that, how interesting does it sound that we would have something dematerialized here, that you were talking about it, and materialize some other place, like in the case of even airplanes that disappear without a trace, they dematerialize here and appear someplace else.
Speaking of missing planes, one of the most fascinating mysteries that I was following, there's not much that comes out on it, but it's that MH370 flight that had disappeared from Malaysia. Do you remember that one?
Right. Yeah.
That was just was so fascinating. And you had the pilot that had the flight simulator in his house, and they did a warrant on his house, and they extracted the data, and just the plane still, they can't find it. I know they found pieces of it washed up. I believe it was along the shore of Africa, which kind of makes sense, because they felt that the plane would have kind of gone down somewhere in the Indian Ocean. But those types of cases are also very fascinating as well.
Yeah, well, let's just call for those for the pennies, for the hundreds of dollars for wire transfers right now coming to our show, Dr. Elliott. Let's just have it. The unexplained positive phenomena happen here.
That would be great.
So we could continue our show. Unfortunately, it is coming to an end. We have been talking about the poltergeist phenomena, which remains a complex and enigmatic subject, blending elements of the paranormal and scientific inquiry. Scientific investigation into the field have pointed potential explanations such as electromagnetic fields, infrasounds, psychological factors, environmental circumstances. However, conclusive evidence regarding the existence or non-existing poltergeist activity remains elusive. So what we know is what we know. We cannot disregard the personal experiences of people, and further in disciplinary research and objective analysis are required to unravel the mysteries surrounding poltergeist for a more comprehensive understanding of the phenomenon. So please support us in this endeavor. We thank you for joining us today. We've been live on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM with myself, Dr. Yana, and fantastic Dr. Elliott, his ESP Excellency. So have a good night, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Elliott, for staying up so late. I know that you're not feeling well, but thank you for joining us and actually be a part of it today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. We'll see you guys next week. Next week we have Chris Stiles, and we'll be talking about UFOs, aliens, and all kinds of things.
Have a good night, everyone.